They told him it was over. The doctors at St. Jude's, the most expensive hospital in the city, looked billionaire Alexander Sterling in the eye and told him his newborn son had no heartbeat. They even signed the death certificate. The room was filled with the sound of a mother's heart breaking. But in the hallway, a poor waitress named Sarah, ignored by everyone, saw something the world-famous surgeons missed. She didn't have a medical degree. She didn't have money. But she had a mother's instinct, and she was about to risk her freedom to prove that the billionaire's baby wasn't dead. What happens next will destroy a medical empire and change 2 lives forever. The rain battered the glass facade of the St. Jude's Medical Center, a fortress of glass and steel that loomed over the Seattle skyline. This wasn't just a hospital, it was a sanctuary for the elite. If you were a politician, a tech mogul, or, in Alexander Sterling's case, the heir to the Sterling shipping dynasty, you didn't go to the ER. You went to the platinum wing on the top floor. But tonight, all the money in the Sterling accounts, billions of dollars that moved oceans, couldn't buy a single breath. Time of death, 11:42 p.m. The voice was clinical, detached. It belonged to Dr. Harrison Pierce, the chief of neonatal surgery. He was a man whose hands were insured for $40 million, a man who didn't make mistakes, or so the board of directors claimed. Alexander Sterling stood frozen near the incubator. At 6'2", with the jawline of a movie star and the cold, calculating eyes of a shark, Alexander was a man who controlled everything. He controlled the unions, the stock market, and the press. But looking at the tiny, pale form of his son, Leo, he felt his knees buckle. "No," Alexander whispered. It was a guttural sound, foreign to his throat. "Check again." "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Pierce said, snapping his latex gloves off with a sharp thwack. "We did everything. The lungs were underdeveloped. There was a sudden cardiac arrest. We tried resuscitation for 20 minutes. He's gone." On the bed, Isabella Sterling was screaming. It wasn't a loud scream anymore. Her voice had given out hours ago during the complications of the labor. Now it was a silent, gasping sob that shook her entire frail body. She reached out a hand toward the incubator, wires trailing from her arm. "Let me hold him," she rasped. "Xander, give him to me." Dr. Pierce signaled to the nurse, a severe-looking woman named Brenda with eyes like flint. "It's better if you don't, Mrs. Sterling. The body needs to be processed for the arrangements. It's traumatic." "Give me my son!" Isabella shrieked, the monitor spiking her heart rate alarmingly. Alexander stepped forward, his grief turning into a sudden, blinding rage. He grabbed Dr. Pierce by the lapels of his pristine white coat. "She wants to hold the boy. Give him to her." Dr. Pierce didn't flinch. He was used to powerful men crumbling. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Mr. Sterling, listen to me. The child is blue. He is cold. Do you want that to be the last memory your wife has? Or do you want her to remember the ultrasound? Let Nurse Brenda take him to the morgue. We will clean him up. You can view him in the morning when you are composed." Alexander's grip loosened. The logic was cruel, but it pierced through the fog of his pain. He looked at Isabella, who was hyperventilating, her skin ashen. If she held the lifeless body now, it might kill her, too. "Take him," Alexander said, his voice breaking. He turned his back to the incubator, burying his face in his hands. Nurse Brenda moved with practiced speed. She bundled the tiny, motionless infant into a thick thermal blanket, covering his face completely. She didn't place him in a bassinet. She placed him in a nondescript, grey plastic transport bin, usually used for medical supplies, and placed the lid on top. "Wait!" Isabella cried out. "Why are you covering him like that?" "Protocol, ma'am," Brenda said curtly. "Sanitary transport." Without another word, the nurse wheeled the cart out of the platinum suite, the wheels squeaking softly on the marble floor. In the hallway, the air was still. Dr. Pierce lingered for a moment, adjusting his tie. He pulled a phone from his pocket as he stepped out, ensuring the heavy oak door clicked shut behind him. He typed a message. "It's done. The asset is secured. Prepare the paperwork for a stillbirth. Transfer the funds to the offshore account." He didn't notice the catering cart parked near the janitor's alcove, or the woman crouching behind it, picking up a spilled tray of silverware. Sarah Miller was invisible. That was the primary job description of a waitress for Elite Catering, the company contracted to serve the midnight cravings of the hospital's VIP guests. Sarah was 24, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her uniform was a size too big, hiding a frame thinned by skipping meals, so her younger sister, Emily, could eat. She had messy brown hair tied back in a strict bun, and hands roughened by scrubbing dishes. She wasn't supposed to be on the platinum floor. She had been sent up to deliver a pot of Earl Grey tea and smoked salmon sandwiches to the waiting room for the Sterling family's security team. But on her way back, the wheel of her cart had jammed, spilling forks and spoons everywhere. She was on her hands and knees, scrambling to pick up the silver, when the door to Suite 404 opened. She froze. She knew who was in there. The whole city knew. Alexander Sterling's wife was giving birth. Sarah watched from the shadows of the alcove as Nurse Brenda pushed the grey cart out. Sarah frowned. She had worked in hospitals before, briefly as a nurse's aide, before her mother got sick and the tuition money ran out. She knew standard procedure. Deceased infants were usually transported in a dignified bassinet or a covered gurney, never a plastic supply bin, and they certainly weren't rushed toward the service elevator. Then she saw the doctor come out, Dr. Pierce. She saw him check his phone. She saw the smirk. Smirk? A baby had just died. Why was the doctor smiling? Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Don't get involved, Sarah," she told herself. "You need this job. You are one rent payment away from eviction." She stood up, clutching the tray of dirty silverware, intending to head to the main elevators. But as Nurse Brenda waited for the service elevator, a sound cut through the sterile hum of the air conditioning. It was faint, like the mewling of a kitten trapped under a floorboard. "Eh." Sarah stopped. She looked at the grey bin on Nurse Brenda's cart. Nurse Brenda didn't seem to hear it. She was tapping her foot impatiently, checking her watch. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open. Brenda pushed the cart inside. "Eh." It was louder this time. A hiccup, a gasp for air. Sarah dropped the tray. The metal clattered loudly on the floor, echoing like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. Nurse Brenda's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Sarah standing there, staring at the cart. "What are you looking at?" Brenda snapped, her hand instinctively going to the lid of the grey bin, pressing it down firmer. "Get back to work, kitchen girl." The elevator doors began to close. Sarah didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk. She didn't think about her rent or her boss yelling at her. She thought about that sound. "Stop!" Sarah yelled, sprinting forward. She jammed her arm between the closing elevator doors. The safety sensor triggered, and the doors bounced back open. Nurse Brenda's face twisted into a mask of fury. "Are you insane? This is a restricted transport. Remove your hand immediately, or I'm calling security." "I heard him," Sarah panted, stepping into the elevator. She was shaking, but her voice was surprisingly steady. "I heard a baby cry in that bin." "Don't be ridiculous," Brenda scoffed, though a bead of sweat rolled down her temple. "This is bio-waste and soiled linens from the delivery. The Sterling baby was stillborn. Now get out!" Brenda reached for the button to close the door, but Sarah grabbed the edge of the cart. "If it's just linens," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto the grey lid. "Then open it." "Security!" Brenda screamed, her voice echoing down the empty shaft. But Sarah was already moving. She shoved past the larger woman, ripping the lid off the plastic bin. Inside, buried beneath a pile of heavy, bloodied surgical towels, was the baby. He wasn't blue anymore. He was a deep, angry purple, struggling for breath, the heavy towels suffocating him. He wasn't dead. He was suffocating. "My God!" Sarah gasped. She reached in, her hands trembling, and pulled the tiny infant out from under the weight of the linens. "Put it back!" Brenda lunged at her, her fingernails digging into Sarah's arm. "You stupid girl, you're ruining everything!" Sarah shoved Brenda back with a strength she didn't know she had. The nurse stumbled, hitting the back wall of the elevator. Sarah looked at the baby in her arms. He was limp. He wasn't crying anymore. The lack of oxygen from being buried in the bin had stopped his breathing. "Come on, little one," Sarah whispered. She fell to her knees on the elevator floor. She ignored Brenda, who was now frantically punching numbers into her phone. Sarah laid the baby flat on her apron. She tilted the tiny chin back, 2 fingers on the chest. Press, press, press. 1, 2, 3, breathe, Sarah murmured, covering the baby's nose and mouth with her own, giving a tiny puff of air. "You're going to jail," Brenda hissed, though she didn't dare touch Sarah now, not while she was performing CPR. "You're assaulting a corpse. That baby is dead." "He's not dead," Sarah yelled back between compressions. "Come on, come on." Press, press, press. Nothing. The baby was still. The elevator doors tried to close again, bumping against Sarah's foot. "Please," Sarah cried, tears blurring her vision. "Don't die on me. Not today." She gave another puff of air. She felt a tiny resistance, a flutter. Suddenly, the baby's chest jerked. A cough racked the tiny body, expelling mucus. And then, wah! The scream was thin, reedy, and the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever heard. The baby's skin flushed from purple to pink as oxygen rushed into his lungs. He flailed his tiny fists, hitting Sarah's chest. Sarah scooped him up, wrapping him in her apron, sobbing with relief. "I got you! I got you!" The elevator dinged again, but this time the doors didn't open to an empty hallway. Standing there were 2 large security guards, and behind them, looking confused and broken, was Alexander Sterling. He had come out into the hall to get away from his wife's weeping. Alexander looked into the elevator. He saw the kitchen girl on her knees. He saw the nurse cowering in the corner. And then he heard it. The cry. Alexander's eyes went wide. He looked at the bundle in Sarah's arms. "That?" Alexander's voice failed him. He took a shaky step forward. "Is that?" Nurse Brenda's face had gone pale as a sheet. She tried to speak, to spin the lie, but it was too late. Sarah looked up at the billionaire, clutching his living son to her chest. She stood up, her uniform stained, her hair falling out of her bun, looking like a warrior. "They told you he was dead," Sarah said, her voice ringing with accusation, pointing a shaking finger at Nurse Brenda. "They were throwing him away with the trash." For a moment, the world stopped spinning. Alexander Sterling stared at the waitress. He looked at the grey bin filled with dirty towels. He looked at Nurse Brenda, who was now trembling violently against the elevator wall. Then, the rage took over. It wasn't the hot, yelling rage of before. This was a cold, lethal calm. "Give him to me," Alexander said softly. Sarah stepped out of the elevator and gently passed the crying infant into his father's massive hands. Alexander held the boy as if he were made of glass. He felt the warmth. He felt the heartbeat against his palm. He's alive, Alexander whispered, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. My son is alive. He looked up at Sarah. Who are you? I'm just the waitress, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. I heard him crying. She had him buried under the towels. Alexander turned his gaze to Nurse Brenda. The look in his eyes would have terrified a demon. Mr. Sterling, Brenda stammered, holding up her hands. It was a mistake, a medical anomaly. Dr. Pierce declared him dead. I was just following protocol for transport. Protocol is to put a dead baby in a plastic bin? Alexander roared, the sound echoing down the corridor. Undersoiled laundry? He turned to the security guards. Don't let her leave. If she takes one step, break her legs. The guards nodded, moving instantly to block the elevator. Where is Pierce? Alexander demanded. He went to his office, Sarah said. I saw him texting. He was smiling. Alexander held his son tighter. Come with me, he said to Sarah. I need you to tell my wife exactly what you saw, and then I'm going to tear this hospital apart, brick by brick. The walk back to Suite 404 was a blur. When Alexander walked in, holding the crying baby, Isabella screamed. But this time, it was a scream of disbelief and joy. She practically fell out of bed, grabbing the child, kissing his face, counting his fingers. He's warm, she sobbed. You said he was cold. You said he was gone. They lied, Alexander said, his voice grim. He turned to Sarah, who was standing awkwardly by the door. This is Sarah. She saved him. She pulled him out of the elevator. Isabella looked at Sarah with eyes full of worship. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. But the tender moment was interrupted by the door swinging open. Dr. Harrison Pierce strode in, holding a clipboard, looking composed. Mr. Sterling, I heard there was some commotion in the hall. Pierce stopped. He saw the baby in Isabella's arms. He saw the color in the child's cheeks. For a split second, the mask slipped. Pure terror flashed across the surgeon's face. Dr. Pierce, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. You seem surprised to see my son. Is it because his heart started beating again? Or is it because your plan to sell him failed? Pierce blinked, regaining his composure. Mr. Sterling, this is a miracle. Lazarus syndrome. It's rare, but it happens. The heart can spontaneously restart. I'm overjoyed, but I assure you, there was no foul play. Lazarus syndrome doesn't explain why your nurse tried to smother him in a trash bin, Alexander spat, and it doesn't explain the text message this young woman saw you send. Pierce looked at Sarah with venomous eyes. Who? Her? The help? You're going to take the word of an uneducated waitress over the chief of surgery? Sarah stepped forward. She was tired of being invisible. I saw you smile, she said clearly, and I know what I heard in that elevator. You weren't disposing of a body. You were smuggling him out. You're fired, Pierce snapped at her. I'll have you arrested for trespassing and slander. No, Alexander interrupted. He pulled his phone out. Actually, Dr. Pierce, I just sent a text, too, to the police commissioner and to my private investigation team. They are freezing the hospital's security footage as we speak. If you deleted anything, we will know. If you called anyone, we will know. Alexander walked up to the doctor, towering over him. And if I find out you did this for money, I will spend every penny I have to make sure you never see the outside of a prison cell again. Dr. Pierce loosened his tie, sweat breaking out on his forehead. You have no proof. We have the witness, Alexander said, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. And that is all we need to start digging. The adrenaline that had fueled Sarah in the hospital corridor began to fade, replaced by a cold, shaking exhaustion. The police had arrived, detectives from the Seattle PD's Major Crimes Unit. But the interaction hadn't gone the way she expected. Dr. Pierce, despite the accusations, was not in handcuffs. He was sitting in the hospital administrator's plush office, flanked by two high-priced lawyers from the firm Sterling and Cooper, no relation to Alexander, but equally expensive. Pierce was spinning a narrative of unfortunate confusion and medical anomaly. He claimed the baby had shown no vitals, and Nurse Brenda, who was nowhere to be found, had made an error in judgment regarding the transport protocols. Sarah, meanwhile, was sitting on a hard plastic chair in the hallway, giving her statement to a skeptical junior detective named Miller. "So, let me get this straight," Detective Miller sighed, flipping his notepad shut. "You, a catering server with no medical license, decided to override the chief of neonatal surgery's diagnosis because you heard a noise in an elevator." "I heard a cry," Sarah insisted, her hands gripping the edge of her stained apron. "And I saw the text message. He said, 'The asset is secured.' Who calls a dead baby an asset?" "Did you see the recipient's name?" "No, but—" "Did you take a photo of the text?" "I didn't have my phone. I was working." The detective looked at her with a mix of pity and dismissal. "Look, Miss Miller, Mr. Sterling is grateful, obviously. You saved his kid. But making accusations about human trafficking against a man like Dr. Pierce without hard evidence, that's a good way to get sued for defamation. We'll look into it, but don't hold your breath." Sarah walked out of St. Jude's at 3:00 a.m. into the pouring rain. She felt small. She felt defeated. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a notification from the gig work app she used for elite catering. Notification. Your contract has been terminated effective immediately due to violation of client privacy policies and unprofessional conduct at a job site. Sarah stared at the screen, rain blurring the text. Fired. She had just saved a billionaire's heir, and she had lost her livelihood because of it. She took the night bus back to the cramped, mouldy studio apartment she shared with her younger sister, Emily. The neighborhood was rough. The Dole District, locals called it, where streetlights were broken and police sirens were the lullaby. Inside, 16-year-old Emily was asleep on the futon, her breathing raspy. Emily had cystic fibrosis. The medication alone cost more than Sarah made in a week. The catering gig was the only thing keeping the power on and the nebulizer running. Sarah sat at the tiny kitchen table, head in her hands. What am I going to do? The next morning, the story broke, but not the truth. The Seattle Gazette headline read, "Miracle at St. Jude's. Sterling heir revived after medical scare." The article praised Dr. Pierce's team for their tireless efforts in resuscitation. Sarah wasn't mentioned. Not once. The hospital's PR machine had erased her. They were rewriting history to protect their reputation and their stock price. Sarah threw the newspaper into the trash. She needed a job, fast. She spent the day applying to diners, warehouses, anything. By evening, the despair was setting in. At 8 p.m., a knock came at the door. Sarah frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She looked through the peephole. A man in a dark maintenance uniform and a cap pulled low was standing there. "Who is it?" she called out through the locked door. "Building maintenance," the man grunted. "Leak downstairs. Need to check your pipes." Sarah hesitated. The landlord usually called first. "I didn't report a leak." "Look, lady, open the door, or I shut off the water for the whole building." Reluctantly, Sarah unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack. The man didn't check the pipes. He slammed his shoulder into the door, knocking Sarah backward onto the floor. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him. He pulled a serrated knife from his belt. Sarah scrambled backward, crab walking away from him. "Emily, run! Lock the bathroom door!" Emily woke up screaming on the futon. "You have a big mouth, Waitress," the man sneered, advancing on Sarah. "Dr. Pierce sends his regards. He says you need to learn when to keep your eyes on the floor." Sarah grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. She wasn't a fighter, but she was desperate. "Get out!" she screamed, swinging the pan. The man laughed, easily dodging the clumsy swing. He lunged, grabbing Sarah by the throat and slamming her against the wall. The knife came up. "Sign the paper," he hissed, pulling a crumbled affidavit from his pocket with his free hand. "Sign it saying you lied, saying you were on drugs, or I cut the little sister first." Sarah clawed at his hand, her vision spotting. She couldn't breathe. Crash! The apartment window shattered inward. A figure in black tactical gear swung in from the fire escape, boots crunching on the glass. Before the attacker could react, the intruder fired a taser. 2 prongs hit the hitman in the neck. He convulsed and dropped to the floor, the knife clattering away. The tactical officer moved with terrifying speed, zip-tying the hitman's hands before speaking into a radio headset. "Threat neutralized. Target is secure. Requesting extraction." Sarah gasped for air, sliding down the wall, clutching her throat. The door to the apartment burst open, not kicked in but unlocked with a key. Alexander Sterling stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing a dark trench coat, his face pale with rage. Behind him were 2 massive bodyguards. He stepped over the unconscious hitman as if he were a piece of garbage. He went straight to Sarah, kneeling on the dirty floor of her apartment. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, his voice trembling. "I was too slow. I knew he would come for you, but I was almost too late." "You," Sarah coughed. "You sent him?" She pointed at the tactical officer. "I have private security, watching everyone involved," Alexander said. "When Pierce made a call to a burner phone an hour ago, my team traced the location here. We didn't wait for the police." Alexander looked around the squalid apartment. He saw the mold on the ceiling. He saw the terrifyingly thin sister, Emily, shaking in the corner. He saw the newspaper in the trash that gave Pierce all the credit. "Pack your bags," Alexander said firmly. "What?" Sarah asked. "You can't stay here. Pierce knows where you live. He won't stop until you're dead, because you are the only loose end that can send him to prison for life." Alexander stood up and offered her his hand. "You and your sister are coming with me." The Sterling estate was less of a house and more of a compound, located on a private island in the Puget Sound, accessible only by a bridge with a guard checkpoint or by helicopter. Sarah and Emily were given the guest wing, a space larger than their entire apartment building. For the first 2 days, Sarah was in a state of shock. She went from counting pennies for ramen to having a private chef ask if she preferred her truffles shaved or infused. But this wasn't a vacation. It was a war room. On the 3rd day, Alexander summoned Sarah to the library. The room was lined with mahogany shelves and dominated by a massive oak desk covered in monitors. Isabella Sterling was there, holding baby Leo. When Sarah walked in, Isabella stood up and hugged her fiercely. "You saved him twice," Isabella whispered. "Alexander told me about the attack at your apartment. We will never let anyone hurt you again." Alexander cleared his throat. He looked exhausted. He hadn't slept. "Please sit down, Sarah. We have work to do." Sarah sat. "Did the police arrest the man who attacked me?" "The police are useless," Alexander said flatly. "The man who attacked you is an ex-con with no official ties to Pierce. He's keeping his mouth shut. Pierce is smart. He uses layers." Alexander turned a monitor around. It showed a complex web of bank transfers. "I hired a forensic accountant, a man named Cypher, who used to work for the NSA. We tracked the offshore account Pierce texted about. The money for Leo, It didn't come from a random adoption agency. Sarah leaned in. Where did it come from? It came from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands called Ethelgard Holdings, Alexander said. Does that name mean anything to you? Sarah shook her head. No. It didn't mean anything to me either, Alexander said, until we dug into who owns the shell company. It traces back to a man named Victor Draven. Isabella gasped. Draven? The tech billionaire? The one who owns Neuralink? The same, Alexander nodded grimly. Victor Draven and his wife have been trying to conceive for 10 years. They've spent millions on IVF. They are obsessed with legacy, genetic perfection. They didn't want to adopt a random child. They wanted a child of exceptional stock. My stock. Sarah felt sick. They were buying your baby because of his DNA? Like a purebred dog. Exactly. Alexander slammed his fist on the desk. Pierce wasn't just selling a baby. He was fulfilling a contract for a designer heir. Draven offered $50 million for a healthy male infant from a titan of industry lineage. Pierce saw Leo struggling to breathe, realized he could declare him dead to us, and then ship him out the back door to Draven's private jet. That's monstrous, Sarah whispered. It gets worse, Alexander said. We have the money trail, but it's circumstantial. Pierce will claim the money was a donation or a consulting fee. Draven will deny everything. Unless... Alexander looked at Sarah. Unless what? Unless we catch them in the act, Alexander said. Pierce thinks the deal fell through because of a nosy waitress. He doesn't know we know about Draven. He still owes Draven a baby, or the money back. So we bait the trap, Alexander said, his eyes cold. We need someone to go back into St. Jude's, someone who knows the layout, someone who can plant a listening device in Pierce's office before he scrubs his servers. I can't go back there, Sarah said, fear spiking in her chest. He knows my face. He knows Sarah, the waitress, Alexander said. He doesn't know Sarah, the wealthy heiress. Alexander slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a passport with Sarah's photo, but a different name. Sarah Kensington. We are going to give you a makeover, Alexander said. Hair, clothes, posture. You're going to walk into St. Jude's not as a server, but as a potential donor. A wealthy philanthropist looking to fund a new pediatric wing. Pierce's greed is his weakness. He won't refuse a meeting with a walking checkbook. You want me to spy on him? Sarah asked. I want you to destroy him, Alexander corrected. If you can get this USB drive into his computer, Cypher can download his deleted emails. We can prove the kidnapping plot. We can prove the hit on you. We can bring down Draven and Pierce in one stroke. Sarah looked at Isabella, who was rocking Leo. She looked at the luxury around her, thinking of Emily safe in the next room, receiving the best medical care money could buy. She thought of the cold, grey bin, the silence of the baby. Sarah stood up. She picked up the fake passport. When do I start? 3 days later, Sarah Miller didn't exist. Standing in the lobby of St. Jude's Medical Center was Sarah Kensington. Her mousy brown hair had been dyed a striking platinum blonde and cut into a sharp, fashionable bob. She wore a tailored Chanel suit that cost more than her mother's house. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting her cheekbones, making her look fierce and unrecognizable. She wore glasses with thick black frames, which also happened to house a high-definition camera and microphone transmitting directly to Alexander's security van parked 2 blocks away. Comms check, Alexander's voice buzzed in her ear through a microscopic earpiece. Can you hear me? Loud and clear, Sarah murmured, adjusting her Hermes scarf. I'm approaching the reception. Remember, Alexander coached her. You are arrogant. You are impatient. You are rich. People like Pierce don't respect kindness. They respect power. Sarah walked up to the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman Sarah used to joke with while delivering coffee, didn't even blink in recognition. "I have an appointment with Dr. Pierce," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, sounding bored. "Sarah Kensington. I'm 10 minutes early and I expect to be seen immediately." "Of course, Miss Kensington," the receptionist stammered, intimidated by the suit and the attitude. "I'll call up right away." 5 minutes later, Sarah was walking down the familiar corridor of the Platinum Wing. It was surreal. A week ago, she was scrubbing floors here. Now she was walking in heels that clicked loudly on the marble. She passed the elevator. The memory of the grey bin flashed in her mind, making her stumble slightly. "Stay focused, Sarah," Alexander's voice came through. "You're doing great. Turn left." Dr. Pierce's office door was open. The doctor stood up, a charming, fake smile plastered on his face. He looked tired. The scandal had taken a toll, but the promise of a donation had clearly energized him. "Miss Kensington," Pierce extended a hand. "It is an honor. The Kensington Foundation does incredible work in Europe, I hear." "We try," Sarah said, shaking his hand firmly. She sat down, crossing her legs. She placed her clutch bag on his desk. The bag contained a high-powered signal jammer that would disable the room's security cameras, looping the footage so his security team wouldn't see what she was about to do. "I'll get straight to the point, Doctor," Sarah said. "My family wants to open a specialized neonatal unit in London. We are looking for a partner. Someone who pushes the boundaries. Someone who isn't afraid of unconventional methods." Pierce's ears pricked up. "Unconventional? We are interested in genetic optimization," Sarah lied smoothly, reciting the script Alexander had written. "Ensuring the best outcomes for the elite. I heard rumors that you handle special cases, discreetly." Pierce studied her. The greed was warring with caution in his eyes. "We pride ourselves on privacy," Pierce said slowly. "Good," Sarah said. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city. "Because we are willing to invest $50 million, but I need to know your systems are secure. I need to see your data management." "My data is impenetrable," Pierce bragged. "Show me," Sarah challenged, turning around. "Show me your patient outcomes for the last month. Prove to me you can handle a high-risk asset." Pierce hesitated. Then his ego won out. He turned to his computer. "I can show you the anonymized logs." He typed in his password. "Now, Sarah," Alexander hissed in her ear. "Distract him." Sarah knocked her heavy clutch bag off the desk. It hit the floor with a loud thud, spilling a compact mirror and lipstick. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Sarah exclaimed, bending down. Pierce, playing the gentleman, stood up and moved around the desk to help her. "Allow me, Miss Kensington." As he bent down, Sarah's hand shot up to the desktop. In one fluid motion, practiced 100 times with Alexander over the last 2 days, she inserted the black USB drive into the back of Pierce's tower. "Got it," she whispered, barely moving her lips. On the screen, a small loading bar appeared. "Uploading. 10%. 20%. She needed to keep him occupied for 60 seconds. "Thank you, Doctor," Sarah said, standing up slowly, taking the lipstick from him. She made a show of checking her reflection in the mirror. "You know, you look familiar." Pierce froze. "Do I?" "Yes," Sarah said, her heart hammering. "I feel like I've seen you. Maybe in the news?" "Ah, yes." Pierce waved a hand dismissively. "There was a ridiculous tabloid story recently. A mix-up with a stillbirth, completely blown out of proportion." "A mix-up?" Sarah stepped closer to him, blocking his view of the computer screen. 50%. 60%. That sounds dreadful. Was the baby misplaced? Pierce laughed, a cruel, short sound. The baby was dead, or so we thought. Then some hysterical waitress interfered. It was a miracle of biology, nothing more. A waitress? Sarah repeated. And what happened to her? Oh, she was fired, Pierce sneered. People like that, they don't belong in our world, Miss Kensington. They are background noise, disposable. Sarah felt a surge of cold rage. She locked eyes with him. Disposable. Is that what you told Victor Draven when you failed to deliver the Sterling baby? The room went dead silent. Pierce's face went white. The charm evaporated instantly. How do you know that name? He looked at her, really looked at her. He looked past the blonde hair, past the glasses. He saw the eyes. You, Pierce whispered. You're the waitress. He lunged for the phone on his desk. Now, Sarah screamed. The door to the office exploded inward. This time, it wasn't Alexander. It was a SWAT team, led by Detective Miller, who had finally seen the evidence streaming in from Cypher's hack. FBI, get on the ground. Pierce scrambled back, knocking his chair over. You can't do this. I am a doctor. I have rights. Alexander Sterling walked in, behind the SWAT team, looking every inch the vengeful billionaire. He walked past the agents, past the guns, and stood over Pierce, who was being handcuffed on the carpet. You have rights, Alexander said calmly, and you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. Alexander looked at the computer screen. Download complete. He pulled the USB drive out and handed it to the detective. Here is your proof, detective. Emails, bank transfers, and the communication logs with Victor Draven. It's all there. Kidnapping, fraud, attempted murder. Pierce was hauled to his feet. As they dragged him out, he screamed at Sarah. You're nobody! You're nothing! You'll pay for this! Sarah took off her glasses. She wiped the expensive lipstick off her mouth with the back of her hand. I'm not nobody, she said, her voice steady. I'm the woman who beat you. 6 months later. The trial of Dr. Harrison Pierce was not just a legal proceeding. It was a public execution of a reputation. The courtroom was packed every single day, the gallery filled with the families of the victims Sarah's evidence had uncovered. When the jury foreman stood up to read the verdict, the silence in the room was heavy enough to suffocate. We find the defendant, Dr. Harrison Pierce, guilty on all counts, the foreman announced, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, and attempted murder. Pierce, once the arrogant king of the medical world, slumped in his chair. He looked small, shriveled, and utterly defeated. He turned his head, searching the gallery, and his eyes locked with Sarah's. She sat in the front row, dressed not in a waitress's uniform or a disguise, but in a simple, elegant navy dress. She didn't look away. She held his gaze until the bailiff hauled him up to be handcuffed. There was no fear left in her. The monster was just a man, and a broken one at that. Victor Draven fared no better. His empire was dismantled by federal regulators, his assets frozen, and his legacy reduced to ash. The instant karma the world craved had been delivered in a tidal wave. 2 weeks after the verdict, the summer sun bathed the terrace of the Sterling estate in golden light. The estate, a sprawling mansion on a private island near Seattle, had become Sarah's sanctuary, but she knew it couldn't be her permanent home. Sarah sat at a patio table, books spread out before her. Anatomy and physiology, pharmacology, ethics in nursing. Studying on a Saturday, Sarah looked up to see Alexander Sterling walking out through the French doors. He looked different than the terrified father she had met that rainy night in the elevator. The darkness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a lightness she hadn't seen before. In his arms, He held 6-month-old Leo. Leo was thriving. He was a chubby, laughing bundle of energy with Alexander's eyes and Isabella's smile. He insisted on seeing his godmother. Alexander grinned, bouncing the baby. And I think he wants to chew on your highlighter. Sarah laughed, taking the baby into her arms. Leo immediately reached for her nose, gurgling happily. The weight of him, warm and solid, was the best therapy she could have asked for. "I got the acceptance letter today," Sarah said softly, nodding toward a thick envelope on the table. "University of Washington Nursing School. Full scholarship." Alexander sat down opposite her, his expression turning serious. "You know you don't need the scholarship, Sarah. I told you, I established a trust fund for you. You never have to work a day in your life." "I know," Sarah said, rocking Leo. "And I'm grateful, Alexander. More than I can say. But I can't just exist. I spent my whole life being invisible, scrubbing dishes while people looked right through me. I want to do something. I want to be the person who notices the things others miss. Just like I noticed Leo." Alexander watched her with a strange expression. It was a mix of admiration and hesitation. "You have a good heart, Sarah. A rare heart," he said. "But before you commit to 4 years of nursing school, there is something else we need to discuss. The final chapter of the investigation." Sarah frowned, her stomach tightening. "Is it Pierce? Is he appealing the verdict?" "No, Pierce is gone," Alexander assured her. "This isn't about him. It's about you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound file. He placed it on the table next to her textbooks. "When my forensic team was tearing apart Pierce's digital life, they found his old archives, records from 25 years ago, back when he ran a small, shady fertility clinic in Ohio, before he became the big-shot surgeon at St. Jude's." Sarah stiffened. "I'm from Ohio. My mum went to a clinic there." "I know," Alexander said gently. "You told me your mother was sick, that she struggled. You told me your father abandoned you before you were born, that he was just a name on a birth certificate that didn't exist." "He didn't exist," Sarah said, her voice hard. "My mum said he was a mistake, a ghost." "He wasn't a ghost," Alexander corrected. "He was a donor, an unwitting one." Sarah stopped rocking Leo. The air on the terrace suddenly felt very still. "What are you talking about?" "Pierce was running illegal trials," Alexander explained, his voice low. "He was taking genetic material from high-profile clients, men who came to him for routine checkups, and using it to help women who couldn't afford treatment in exchange for their silence. He was playing God." Alexander tapped the file. "Your mother was one of those women, Sarah. And we matched the DNA markers found in Pierce's hidden files with your medical records from when we admitted you to the private clinic here." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "So, my father is just some random patient Pierce stole from?" "Not random," Alexander said. He leaned forward. "Sarah, do you know the name Arthur Blackwood?" Sarah blinked. The name was impossible not to know. Arthur Blackwood was an industrial tycoon, a man who had built a steel and energy empire that rivaled the Sterlings. He was a billionaire 3 times over. And he had died 6 months ago, famously leaving behind a massive fortune and no heirs. His estate was currently locked in a vicious legal battle between distant cousins and corporate vultures. The steel magnate?" Sarah whispered. "The same," Alexander said. "Arthur Blackwood was a patient of Pierce's 26 years ago. Pierce stole his sample. And 9 months later, you were born." Sarah stared at the file. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to set Leo down in his carrier. I'm his daughter. Biologically, yes, and legally, Alexander added with a sharp grin. My lawyers have already presented the DNA evidence to the executor of the Blackwood estate. It's irrefutable, Sarah. The courts have validated it. I don't understand, Sarah stammered. What does this mean? It means the cousins get nothing, Alexander said, sitting back and crossing his arms. It means the vultures go home hungry. It means you are the sole heir to the Blackwood legacy. Alexander paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Sarah, you are worth $4.5 billion. The silence on the terrace was deafening. The ocean breeze rustled the papers, the nursing school acceptance letter fluttering next to the file that declared her one of the richest women in the world. Sarah stood up. She walked to the edge of the balcony, gripping the stone railing. She thought of the mouldy apartment. She thought of Emily coughing through the night because they couldn't afford the heating bill. She thought of the manager at the catering company, screaming at her for being 5 minutes late. She thought of being invisible. 4 billion, she whispered. It was a number too big to comprehend. You can walk away, Alexander said, coming up beside her. You can sell the company, take the cash, and live on a beach for the rest of your life. You earned it. You survived the fire. Sarah looked out at the city skyline across the water. She saw the tall glass building of St. Jude's Medical Center shimmering in the distance. The place where protocols were more important than people. The place where money bought life and poverty meant death. She turned back to Alexander. Her eyes were wet, but they were fierce. A fire had been lit inside her, not the fire of survival, but the fire of power. No, Sarah said firmly. No, Alexander asked, confused. I'm not going to a beach, Sarah said. She walked back to the table and picked up the nursing school acceptance letter. She ripped it in half. I don't need to be a nurse to save people, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength with every word. If I go to nursing school, I can help one patient at a time. But if I have $4 billion, she looked at Alexander, a determined smile breaking through her shock. I'm going to buy the hospital. Alexander's eyes widened, and then a slow, impressed smile spread across his face. St. Jude's? I'm going to buy St. Jude's, Sarah declared, and I'm going to fire every single board member who covered for Pierce. I'm going to turn the Platinum Wing into a free ward for mothers who can't afford care. I'm going to make sure that no waitress, no cleaner, no poor woman is ever treated like her baby is trash. She looked down at Leo, who was watching her with wide blue eyes. They thought I was nobody, Sarah said, placing her hand on the Blackwood file. Now I'm the one signing the checks. Alexander extended his hand. Well then, Miss Blackwood, it sounds like we're going to be business partners. Sarah shook his hand. The grip was strong. She wasn't the invisible waitress anymore. She was the miracle. And that is how Sarah Miller went from a silenced waitress to the most powerful woman in the city. She didn't just inherit a fortune. She used it to burn down a corrupt system and build something beautiful from the ashes. Today, the Sarah Blackwood Medical Center stands as a beacon of hope, proving that sometimes the person you ignore is the one who holds the power to change the world. What did you think of that final twist? Do you think Sarah made the right choice to buy the hospital instead of just becoming a nurse? If this story moved you, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story about justice served cold. Thanks for watching.